Hi, everybody. My name is Brianna Morris. I go by Bree for short. I am a desk assistant at the MLC and STEM Center. I created this training with a goal in mind. I want to make sure that all students that come into the STEM LC, they know that it's a safe space for them, and we're here to support them in any way that we can. With that being said, paying special attention to those students that do confide in us and share with us a little bit more of what they may need for support outside of just tutoring. So that means being able to connect them to other resources and other departments for additional support. We need to let them know that we're here for them any possible way that we can be. With that, we are going to focus on 10 different things. A lot of these are going to be defining these terms and understanding the difference between the two of them, and there will be examples provided as well. Most of these terms are what you would go over in a Sociology 101 course. The basic concepts that are then built upon and then theory is involved. But this is basically Sociology 101, going over specific terms that impact populations and communities at large. So getting right into it, we're going to focus on equality versus equity. Equality is sameness. It's when everyone has the same thing, but that only works if everyone starts from the same place. Equity is fairness, so access to all the same opportunities, whatever it means to get that person to be at the same starting point as everyone else. And before we can really enjoy equality, we need to ensure equity, which means making sure that everyone is able to start from the same place. Race versus ethnicity, this is interchangeably said, right? In our country, in our society, in school, everywhere that we go, race and ethnicity is used interchangeably, but there is a huge difference. We identify race based on physical expressions, so that's how our genes manifest in our physical appearance. What races exist varies over time as well as countries. There are races that were included in the US Census that are no longer used, such as mulatto, in more detail breaking down the black and brown community. As sociologists, we identify ethnicity as where you come from, right? Your ancestry, language, religion, or shared community identity, but race does not equal ethnicity. And so there is no real genetic basis to race, but it does have social consequences. If you're judged by your appearance, by the racial group that you're a part of, or even if you appear to be a part of a specific group, that may depend, that may determine how you are treated. Implicit bias. And I went to Webster's dictionary for this definition. A bias or prejudice that is present but not consciously held or recognized. So it doesn't mean that people are walking around intentionally excluding others and making them feel badly. But that does happen without that intent all the time. And as you can see, I have this implicit association test linked here. It was created at Harvard, and it does not claim to be accurate, but what it does do is create a space for a conversation to start. There are really good questions on there that may help you even just think about, how can I make sure that my upbringing and unconscious thoughts do not impact how I treat others? I still think it's very useful, but I want you to know that there's no judgment there. If you get a score that you're unhappy with, that's, we can discuss it. It doesn't mean that it's defining you or that it's even correct. But what it does do is give you an opportunity to think about it. It's a thought-provoking exercise. So I'm going to read this quote. We recommend setting aside 10 minutes a day to think through questions and actions suggested. Being self-reflective about our upbringing and about the unconscious thoughts of our brains can be uncomfortable. But just a reminder that the most important thing that we can bring to teaching and tutoring is who we are. These activities are meant to support you because you work so hard to support your students, and I couldn't agree anymore. It's really just to give you an idea of any unaware biases that may be present and how, just once there's awareness there, you can change, right? We can work towards getting better. And then I have this video. It is done by this doctor. She has her own YouTube channel where she goes through different terms and then gives examples. So in this specific video, she did an episode about intention versus impact, and then gives an example of how she experienced that through trying to go to her boss and tell her that she was experiencing discrimination within the workplace. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this for you guys.
What's up, everybody? I'm Dr. CI, and this is episode 8 of our 2018 learning series. Today, we're going to be talking about intention versus impact. What does that mean? What does it look like in action? Well, all the time I go into companies and they refuse to have conversations, authentic conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And then there's this intention that they want to have diversity, but the impact is that they don't want to go deep, and so it is affecting marginalized populations within the workplace. I'll never forget the first time that I heard that in the workplace. I was sitting at a table with my boss, and I was opening up to her and being vulnerable, and I was talking about all the discrimination that I was facing in the workplace and being a Black woman. And her one response in that conversation was, "You need to assume good intent." And that immediately shut down the way that I was feeling in that moment, because I couldn't believe that she didn't hear anything else I had said, but her rebuttal was the assumption of good intent in the moment. And so I'm saying this to companies, I'm saying this to people, that it doesn't really matter if you have good intent. You have to pay attention to the fact that you are impacting something far and wide within your company that is related to their identity, especially when we have conversations about diversity. So I want you to not lead into a conversation with good intentions and say, well, I had the best of intention. Instead, when you lean into a conversation, I want you to ask yourself the question, how might my intentions have impacted someone? How did my words, how did my actions, how did my thoughts really impose upon this person's well-being in the moment and long-term? So both short-term and long-term, right? So think about your intentions, think about your impact, have those difficult conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and don't think that because you are a good person and you had the best of intent, that couldn't have been an outcome that was negative for someone else. So make sure you check out our resources at the bottom of this video in our description link that talk about what is impact, what is intention, and what do you need to do to negate it in the company and understand how to have those conversations. I'm Dr. CI, this is episode 8, and we'll see you soon in episode 9. Y'all have a great week.
What are microaggressions? We're going to talk about microaggressions, prejudice, and racism. Microaggressions are everyday verbal and nonverbal slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional. They communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages. This targets persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. And the macro impacts, language matters, right? The cumulative effect of microaggressive behavior towards an individual can have devastating effects for that individual's well-being. Stereotype threat, that risk of confirming a self-characteristic that other people are grouping you in because of the social group that you're a part of. Imposter syndrome, referring to a high-achieving individuals marked by an inability to internalize their accomplishments and persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. People that come from marginalized groups, they always feel like they're proving themselves, and imposter syndrome is something that happens when you've worked so hard to get to where you're at, but you don't feel like you belong and you feel like you're not supposed to be there. And all of this leads to poor self-confidence, depressions, poor self-image, internal frustration, anxiety, trauma, that feeling of not belonging. And, it has two examples. Where are you really from? If somebody asks where somebody's from and they look to the person that's asking, they look like they can't be from where they say they are, and they respond, where are you really from? It's insulting. Wow, you're really articulate. This is something I have been made fun of for. Enunciating my words, I've been laughed at. It's implying that you are surprised that that person can speak properly, and it's just an unnecessary thing to ask or comment on or say. Prejudice, preconceived judgment or opinion, an irrational attitude of hostility directed towards an individual that's part of a specific group, race, or their supposed characteristics. Racism, the belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. This is something that it may not be intentional, but through that, the outcome is the same. If you treat people poorly because of the color of their skin or what they look like, because you feel like that you are superior to them, just because you don't see that it's because you are white and that person is brown, just because that understanding doesn't take place doesn't make it less racist. So that is something that a lot of people don't understand, I think, and I definitely wanted to bring that up into the discussion today. Stigma and stereotypes. So this video is of a psychologist, a therapist. She speaks on how stigma and stereotypes impact her clients, her patients, and when they come to her, she's kind of speaking for them, kind of using her voice to express how this impacts individuals immensely.
Groups that we think very carefully about. Important to me is that our clinical treatment be appropriate for diverse cultural groups, that we think very carefully about, what we're doing, and is it really universal, and, might some ways of working be a better fit for some clients than others, or even are there issues that we need to consider in working with clients of diverse backgrounds. I also think about not just cultural diversity, but also clients who are members of historically oppressed or stigmatized groups, so that it may not be ethnic or racial diversity, but people who might be looked down upon in society in some way, or might be excluded from different aspects of society in some way, where there's perhaps a lot of stereotypes of prejudice. So people in the LGBTQ community, people with physical disabilities. So the notion of exclusion and stigmatization, I think, are important to look at. And with depression, I think that those allowing people the space to talk about those kinds of experiences is very important as well.
Is there a way that you language it to invite them to explore that?
Right. So I often talk about very, very much experiences in the world, like, and how the world treats you. How do you think the world sees you? Those kinds of questions, so that people begin to be sensitized, and later on we may talk about that issue of the inner critic, but people begin to be sensitized to what they've internalized in terms of messages from larger society about their value and their worth. And I think sometimes depression for members of historically oppressed and marginalized groups has some relationship to those issues of internalizing those negative stereotypes or those expectations that, you're not really capable, those sorts of things. So I think that that's important. I think it's also important to be very direct. So I'll ask people specifically, have you had experiences with discrimination or racism or heterosexism or homophobia or whatever the relevant issue is? It's very direct. And my experience is that people find relief when you put those things in the room very directly. You're saying, I'm open to talking about this. I'm not afraid of it. And, you can share those types of experiences here. So I think that those issues feel very important to me for therapists to consider, in addition to, sort of the typical things people might think about in terms of depression. But integrating, that we live in a world, and what's happening in the world affects people. And that's an important issue to bring into therapy. It's not just internal, but that, interaction between the external world we live in and then what we do with that internally. and how our internal experience then sometimes impacts what our experiences are in the external world, our ability to cope with racism. I think people who are depressed and have low self-esteem have an impaired ability to manage the discrimination and racism they might experience, and might have a tendency for self-blame. The issue with self-blame in terms
A lot of people go through these experiences without even knowing that that's what they went through. And they feel bad about themselves and they blame themselves, right? They internalize the way that people are treating them, the standards that others are keeping them at. So exclusion versus inclusion. Seeing oneself as inferior, that's what happens when you feel excluded. The onset of stereotype threat, embracing those stereotypes because everybody is labeling you as that. Causes emotional pain akin to physical pain. Emotional pain can turn into physical manifestations. Threats to the fundamental needs. You may not even be able to express what you need because you have felt so excluded that what would be the reason for me to speak up if no one is even seeing me, right? Inclusion, what it feels like, what it looks like. Eliminates that insider versus outsider culture. No clicking up, just everyone's on the same team. Everyone is here with the same goal in mind, and that is to help students any way that we can and focus primarily on that, because without our students, we wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be a center. There wouldn't be tutoring if there were no students. Most of the departments on the campus wouldn't exist without students. We are there, our sole purpose is to serve them the best way that we can. Employees, everyone, there should be no favoritism. Every employee should feel valued and equal. Improves productivity, it improves morale and creativity, and reduces harassment, discrimination, and bullying. If you have a boss that is harassing their employees or discriminating their employees or bullying their employees, their other employees are going to catch on with that behavior and also do it. Name pronunciation. This is a huge one. We have a lot of students that come in here from all over the world, and we have a lot of people who work here in the center that are from all over the world. So learning how to pronounce people's names correctly is not just a common courtesy, but it's also an important effort towards making people and students feel welcome. This emphasizes psychological safety and belonging. Hearing your name being said correctly, having a person ask, "How do you say your name?" It means a lot to even care to ask, right? And instead of trying to say that person's name over and over again, and you may be unfamiliar with it, ask them how to pronounce it. Pay attention to where they put emphasis, where the inflections are. Repeat after them a couple of times, but don't overdo it. Don't create a moment out of it, right? Just hear their name, and even if maybe another time you interact with them, you need to ask them again, that's fine, but don't create this awkward moment, right? Don't make a big deal or spend a long time talking about how unfamiliar you are with their name. Gender pronouns. Pronouns are one of the ways people portray their identities. When someone asks you to use their pronouns, they are asking for you to respect their identity. If you see somebody using their pronouns publicly, like especially in Zoom, maybe it's by their name, so that for you to identify them. This is, something that somebody does because they want to be seen. So it's important to refer to somebody using the right pronouns, especially if they are displaying them for you. If you use somebody's pronouns wrong accidentally, it can still lead to feelings of disrespect, exclusion, and alienation. So still that intention versus impact thing that we need to keep in mind, there's a balance. If you see somebody that is putting their pronouns out there so that you know how to refer to them, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are part of the LGBTQIA community. I think it's important that also allies show their gender pronouns so that people know that they can depend on them as an ally. It doesn't necessarily mean that every time that you see that you are to assume that they are part of the LGBTQI community. Referrals and reporting, these are just reminders from our training. The MiraCosta Care referral, that's the website there where it says visit the MiraCosta Care's website for more information. It'll explain on there a little bit what those forms are used for. Really, a care referral form is if you think that somebody's in need of the care team reaching out to them. And there's a way to set on that form whether it is of high urgency or normal or low. But it's pretty much as if you think somebody is in need for more support and they need a follow-up to ensure that, that's what that's for. And it could be somebody made you feel uncomfortable and you want to report it, or vice versa. You see somebody that's in distress and you want to report it. Bias incident reporting. If you see anything that goes against MiraCosta standards when it comes to inclusion, if you see anything that you want the school to know about, that's what that report form is for. Title IX and discrimination form is along the same guidelines. If you see something that goes against Title IX standards, or you see any discrimination of any kind, that form is there for you to use. Outside resources in other departments. So it is important to listen to our students. If they talk about anything outside of tutoring or the course that they're coming in to get help with, it's because they need more support, right? We have access to that. We have access to every department at our fingertips, via MiraCosta website. We can connect them and link them to whatever it is that they need, even if it's from other campuses on campus or other resources that you may know of. If you know of any shelters or food banks, food distributions, anything like that. There are many programs and clubs on campus where students can get more support and have an opportunity to engage with other students and get more involved with the MCC community. Feeling more supported can lead to more success, and students can achieve that through becoming a part of the community within our community, right? Finding people that they have stuff in common with and being able to be supported in that way. Poor people and people of color especially are much more likely to be found in prison than in institutions of higher education. And this is a quote from Angela Davis. She is an activist, a very, very, very inspirational woman, and I admire her greatly. She is basically saying here that, think about when you are helping marginalized students, people that are a part of the minority, they're here in our center trying to better their life. And the odds are against them from the beginning, even if you come from a good family, if you get good grades, if it's not just those things, right? It's a lot of things all combined. So I think that this quote is just so powerful because it states a very obvious systemic issue that we have in our country. Marginalized groups are forced to be innovative of ways to support their family, and sometimes breaking the law is the only way to do it. That's what this quote is about. It's about those people that feel so desperate and feel like they have no hope and they have to steal food or they have to do things that are against the law to get money because they have no other option. It's a very powerful quote to me, and I wanted to share it with you all. So this is a chart with data of why students aren't taking classes this fall. The third most common reason for students at 42% is due to them not being able to pay because they had some type of income loss. And I relate to this personally. My fiance had to get a different job because he needed to be able to stay home and help me with the kids. So we had to take a pay cut to be able to do that. And we have struggled ever since. We've been here since last November, and I think now it is starting to catch up with us, and we are starting to struggle a little bit more, and a lot of people are. And this graph really just puts in perspective the types of homes that students may come from, right? Percentage of Black students from families living in poverty by parents' educational level, and this is based on 2018 data, but I still think it's relevant. 64% of Black families living in poverty have parents with the highest level of education being less than high school. 45% of Black families living in poverty are a mother-only household. 35% of Black families living in poverty are a father-only household. People come from different types of families. And when there's a single parent household or parents that don't have, any education outside of high school, or maybe they barely finished high school, or they didn't finish high school, these students are first generation students. They are trying to break a cycle of their family of uneducated and self-sufficiency. They're trying to do a lot. It's a lot to just be the first parent or the first student in your family. You don't have any other help other than the centers and the tutoring services that the school offers. So I wanted to highlight this just so that we keep that in mind when we are interacting with students, and we may be helping a student that is the provider of their family. Maybe they're a single parent themselves. Just things to keep in mind. If students are not well, not physically, but mentally, if they are not living in a space that is safe, or they don't have access to nutrition, they can't pay their bills, those are the things I care most about as a faculty member this semester. It's about a change in perspective, having philosophical shift of mind to really be more ethically devoted to students and caring and compassionate to students. I chose this quote because I find it to be exactly how I want to help students. Her philosophy just matches mine, and I want to spread that to everyone, to come from a place of love. And people come from all over. They have different experiences. And we need to be sensitive to that as a center, as a support center. We need to be careful. I hope that you guys enjoyed this training. There will be an opportunity to discuss further. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Bye for now.